me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me. So maybe this peculiar treasure, the taxes have made him rich and wise, right? I mean, his wisdom never left him. God granted him the wisdom. So but all this stuff that came with him, and I mean, he had it. And then in verse 10, and whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. Now, I think verse 10 is trying to, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of seeking a self-satisfaction. I mean, that's kind of what he's seeking here, I think. He's trying to say, okay, now all these other things I've got, and all these other things I've done with all my wealth and all my wisdom, and now I'm just going to please me, myself. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy. I want you to remember the word joy. Remember that word. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. So all that he had done was his. This was my portion. Now, Brother Philip taught last Wednesday about the portion of the saved and the portion of the unsaved. If you was here Wednesday evening, we know the portion that goes to the unsaved is eternal damnation. The portion of the saved is heaven. Now, that's spiritually speaking. But under the sun, here on this earth, the preacher here is saying, all this wealth that I have and all these things that I have done, I've never kept anything from me, anything I wanted. Everything I wanted to do, I've done it. And this is my portion for doing it. This is my happiness. This is my joy. Okay? Now, that's what he's convinced himself at this point. But now let's don't stop there. Verse 11, then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? There's something missing in this man's life. There's something that's not satisfying. And you and me and probably everybody else in the world has striven to satisfy our wants, our needs. I don't know about you guys, but I've always had more than I needed. And I'm not saying that boastful, I'm saying that thankfully to God for the way he has provided in my life for me and my family and all. I'm so thankful for that. But we as a people, I've always heard people say, and I've never been rich, so this has never been a problem for me, but people say rich people are never satisfied. Even though they got it all, they want more. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I have no idea. But I do know that people who have a lot try to accumulate to more. And you don't go out and waste what you work for, right? But this is still, there's something that's missing. Now, when I read this, of all the things that this preacher has accumulated and all that he never withheld nothing from him, I think of the rich man who built bigger barns. I got bigger barns. I'm going to take my ease, and I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry for years to come. Why wouldn't you say that the Lord, when he told the rich man about the barns and stuff, thou fool, tonight thy soul is required of thee? There was something missing. There was something missing. If you go back and read that account, you'll see how many times that guy uses I, me, and my in those verses. And I don't remember, but it's a lot in just a few verses. Well, here, this preacher, with all his wisdom, is saying, I'm still not satisfied. There's something missing. It's all vanity and vexation of spirit. Everything I've done, there was no profit under the sun. Why not? What was missing? What was missing? Let's go to John chapter 15. John chapter 15, beginning with verse 10. And this is Jesus talking. He says, if you keep my commandments. Wonder why he put if there. Compare the preacher to the rich man with the barns. In your mind. If you keep my commandments, you shall abide in my love, even as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. Verse 11. These things have I spoken unto you, that my joy might remain in you, and that your joy might be full. My joy remain in you. Right? Why? So your joy will be full. Now, in these two verses, he's not guaranteeing you not hardships. It's not. He's talking about spiritual things, heavenly things, eternal things. Whereas the preacher in Ecclesiastes chapter 2 is talking about under the sun. And in verse 10, in chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes, I withheld not my heart from any joy. What's the difference between the joy that Jesus is talking about and the joy that the preacher's talking about? He's talking about under the sun, isn't he? He's talking about earthly, and then what does he call it? What does he call it in verse 11? Vanity and vexation of spirit. What does Jesus call it in verse 11? Your joy might be full. Well, how do I keep that? How do I make my joy full? Well, he said, keep my commandments. Right. Keep his commandments. Trust in God. So there's a contrast there, I think, between the joy that Jesus is talking about and the joy that the preacher's talking about. Because the joy that the preacher's talking about didn't satisfy him. There was still vanity and vexation of spirit. Sean, do you have something?
I think in light of verse 11, it reminded me of a song we used to sing with the kids to describe joy. And it said, J-O-Y, J-O-Y, tell me what it means. Jesus first, yourself last, and others in between. The J-O-Y.
Right.
I think that kind of sums up what the type of joy that Jesus is
Yeah.
describing here.
I think you're exactly right. That's pretty good. I never thought about anything like that.
I thought of that little
Yeah.
song and I loved it.
I've never heard that song, but I need to, I guess, look that up because that's pretty neat. But there's a difference in joy under the sun and the joy of having peace of eternal life.
That's right.
There's a big difference. And you can go out, and the Bible teaches us that there's pleasure in sin for a season, but it does not satisfy. It still doesn't satisfy the person. And people, I mean, I don't know how to, I wish I was better at articulating my thoughts, but I've never seen anybody that said they were perfectly content with the way their life was living outside of Christ. I've not. I don't mean there's not somebody that says that. But one of the guys I used to work with, he's kind of an atheist, if you will, or I don't know exactly what the right word would describe him, but he counts on himself bringing his own pleasure to his whole life. He has no inclination that there's a God, or he pretends like he doesn't. And him and I have had long discussions about it, and he keeps telling me how stupid I am and crazy. And I told him, I said, you might believe that, but one of these days, you're going to know there's a God. And the best thing you can do is realize that now and not put it off. Ah, you're crazy. But then I talk with him about worldly things, and he's always complaining about something. It's either complaining about the government, complaining about people, the way they talk, the way they do things, even his wife. He says there's times she just gets on my nerves. He's not content, but he depends on himself for his contentment. He's talking about the joy under the sun. He's not talking about the joy and the peace of hope of eternal life. And when you see that, and you study this, I understand why he's never happy. You know what I mean? Because everything that Solomon, or the preacher here, has done, all the great riches, all the things he did, he kept not his heart or eyes from anything. Whatever he wanted to do, he done it. And he still wasn't satisfied.
Spiritual or trusting in God, that's a stable place to be. He don't change.
Right.
And there's a lot of comfort in knowing where you stand.
Yeah.
Okay, anything under the sun, it don't matter. You know, I'm not talking about sin. I'm talking, just for example, if I go out and spend $10,000 to plant a crop, I try to do everything I can to ensure that crop will be productive. But there's lots of things that I can't control, like for instance the weather. You know, I can control the depth of the soil and the kind of seed and weed control. But I'm never satisfied with that crop, because we should have got rain on the 4th of July, but we didn't get it till the 20th, you know.
Yeah.
Or maybe I should have planted on May the 5th instead of the 20th of May, and the rain would have hit just right. And there's nothing ever stays the same. And that's why there's no joy in it.
Right. And that's why this preacher finds it all to be vanity and vexation of spirit.
Right.
The question is, and I'm not asking you to answer out loud, but can you relate to what he's talking about in your lives? All of us? I mean, we all can, right? I mean, we know what he's saying. Because under the sun, we face tribulations, trials, tests, even as Christians. Even as Christians. And we'll find that in this chapter too. So it's quite a challenge for a person to make themselves happy and content under the sun. I'm not sure it can be done. I don't think it can. I don't think that you can get to the point that, and I told you this before when we studied, I think maybe the book of Jonah, it might have been in 3rd John or whenever we studied, about the doctor who says people who come into emergency, or a doctor in a hospital that takes care of people who's ready to die, intensive care unit and such things as that. Those patients toward the end of their lives and their families come to this doctor because the doctor was a spiritual person and wanted to know what we had to do to make this better spiritually, even though they was never interested in it before. And I think you see that in this preacher, this guy who's done everything he can. And I'm going to say this too. I think he wrote a book of Ecclesiastes late in life. I don't think he done this when he was a young man. I think this book was written in elder years toward the end of life for this guy who wrote this book. So, and you know, Solomon, he wrote the Song of Solomon, which was probably when he was young. Proverbs when he was maybe middle age. I think this book came late in life. I might be wrong, but that's just the way it seems to me. But anyway, this joy in verse 10, if we as Christians will understand that our earthly joy, can we have joy? Can we have happiness? Yeah. Right. And I'm going to tell you, it's been, since COVID hit, it's not happened. But we used to have family gatherings at our house, and friends and family. That was the greatest time for me. I was happier then. I could sit down anywhere just knowing my family was safe. How do I know that? Because they was under the roof. My son and his family, my daughter and their family, cousins, uncles, aunts, neighbors, mom, dad, brothers, sisters, nephews, nieces. We're all here. We're all okay. Look at it. We're all here. We're okay. That's contentment to me. But that's not everlasting joy. Why? Because they leave. And since COVID hit, we've never done that. We don't do that. They don't want to do it. We don't want to do it. I mean, be honest about it. So when we're still not finding that eternal happiness, that eternal joy that Jesus talked about in John 15, 10, and 11. So you and I as Christians, make sure that when you're getting angry, when you're getting a little off track, remember, vanity and vexation of spirit under the sun. Okay? Anybody have anything else on them, what we already talked about? Verse 12. And I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that cometh after the king? Even that which hath been already done. What can you do different than he's done? What can you do? What can you do anything different that cometh? For what can the man do that cometh after the king? So this king, whoever the king is he's talking about here, of course it's himself, but what can you do that he hasn't already done? What can you do to bring contentment under the sun? What can you do? Nothing. That's a kind of rhetorical question. And besides, it's already been done. You're not going to do anything different, right? Then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. Okay, now here in chapter 1, verse 17, I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. So now he's revisiting that after he's done all this stuff. And what's his conclusion? That folly is a waste of time. But wisdom exceedeth folly as far as light does darkness. Now we talked about, I think it was in Psalm 119, verse 55, last Wednesday evening, about the night. And we discussed it being literally night or figuratively night, separating the good from the bad. And we discussed both. And here, the wisdom that a person would have if you would seek the joy that Jesus promised compared to the joy under the sun, then you find out that wisdom exceedeth folly by a long, long way. And so, but the wisdom, as far as light excelleth the darkness. Now, we know what light is when we talk about he that walketh in the light, as he is in the light, the blood of Christ continually covers him. We know what walking in the light is spiritually, right? Everybody knows that, understands that. So, when we're walking in darkness, and there's going to be troubled times, there's going to be hardships, there's going to be times when you think it's really dark in your life, sickness, death. I've heard people this morning talking about the way things are in our country, but we as Christians, we stay in the light. We don't let that darkness cover our joy that Jesus talked about. Even though it's troublesome. Even though it's troublesome. Verse 14, the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one even happeneth to them all. So you're talking about wise or unwise. Then said I in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart that this also is vanity. What's he talking about? What happens to one happens to all. What is that? Death. Yeah, it rains on the just, good times, bad times, both. So there's nothing new under the sun. So under the sun, we say in my heart, he said, in my heart, this is also vanity. So what happens to the rich, what happens to the wise, what happens to the poor, what happens to the unwise, happens to everybody. Now that's a mystery. That's kind of, what does that mean? And we'll find out more about it in chapter 3. But just to touch on it a little bit, why does it happen to all? If you go back to chapter 1 and read about God setting the wind in motion, the water in motion, and everything that he's done there in chapter 1, all those things that we discussed earlier, it's the same way with people. It's something we can't change. We can't make things straight. It's just the way it is. So as Christians, we need to be understanding of that. And how many times have you heard somebody say, well, why did God let that happen? You know? I discussed a problem a guy was having in his family, and the excuse was from the one who was having this problem, you don't know what I'm going through. You can't pass judgment on me if you don't know. And this other guy, he goes, you ain't doing anything that ain't happened to anybody else. You're just not brave enough to accept the consequences and do what's right. That's the difference. And I think that's what he's saying here. It's all the same. To the fool, to the wise, to the rich, to the poor, or anybody in between, all that. There's nothing new, regardless of the level that you're at. So here's the challenge for a Christian. How do we get through that? Go back to what Tom said, trust in Christ, right? We're not home yet. Tell yourself that every time you have a problem. I'm not home yet. I'm not home yet. Verse 16. For there is no remembrance of the wise more than of the fool forever. Seeing that which now is in the days to come shall all be forgotten, and how dieth the wise man as the fool. So, we're all going to die. How's the rich man going to die? Just like the fool. We're all going to die. And I think, and this is just a personal opinion, but if more people would come to the conclusion that they're just here for a very short time, and maybe a lot of this nonsense that's going on would stop. I really do. Verse 17, therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me. For all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Hated life. Hated life. And then later, and he'll tell us to enjoy life. Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. Did you ever wonder what's going to happen to what you got? Talked to a guy the other day, and he was telling me about it. He had his will made. And I don't know if he's rich, poor, I don't know what but I know he owns a farm and he's got cattle. And him and his wife went to a lawyer, and he told me this himself. And they had a will made, and he's got 3 or 4 children. I don't know how many children he's got, but he has made a will that those children can't sell the farm, they can't sell the cattle, and they can't spend his money on anything but that farm and the cattle. You telling me it won't work. But that's what he told me. He said, when I die, they can raise the cattle and sell the calves, but they can't sell the cattle. I said, well, how are they going to keep having calves if they don't keep moving the herd around? Well, I never thought about that, he said. What?
Be some lawyers make some money off.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen to his money.
They wait long enough and the cows are going to die.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he didn't tell, I don't know what he put in the will, but he didn't say not go buy a .22 rifle and get rid of the cows. You know, I mean, you can put a stop to the cattle real quick. But the bottom line is, he's trying to hang on to his riches. And his riches, whatever they are, ever how much or ever how little, it's a vanity and a vexation of spirit to that man. He thinks when I die, I'm still going to control it.
He's wanting control. That's
Yeah.
his power struggle.
He's not going to. He's not going to. Yea, I hated all my labor which I taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, no, you said there's things set in motion that we can't change.
Right.
Okay, that's the difference between spiritual man and a physical man under the sun. Man,
Yeah.
is he tries to change them anyway. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the more, like your friend in his will, or back to my example about a crop, the man that tried to change the rain schedule anyway was the guy that buys the irrigation equipment.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But most of the time you don't consider what kind of nutrients is in the water. So then it gets yourself all out of whack because there's too much nutrient of one kind of nutrient in the water. But the bottom line is it's not in man's power to direct him going to.
That's exactly right. And I think that's being pointed out very good right here in this chapter. Yep. And whoso knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool, yet shall he have rule over all my labor, wherein I have labored, and wherein I have shown myself wise under the sun. This is also vanity. So whoever gets whatever I've got, I don't know if they're going to do good with it or do bad with it. I don't know. But again, we're back to verse 15 of chapter 1. That's crooked can't be made straight. You ain't going to change it. We're not going to change it. If a fool gets it and wastes all of it, all little bit of it, or does good with it. I mean, what's that to the guy who's already dead? What does it matter?
One thing's sure, you ain't gonna leave where you're at.
Right.
That's right. You can't make with it.
If we make it to heaven, if we keep God's commandments and our joy is full, we're going to have streets of gold, which is far greater than what we got now, right? And if we go the other way, we ain't going to be worried about going, I need $20 to go down Walmart and buy a bottle of water. We're not going to be thinking that way. But, I mean, you're right. It's not going to matter to the one that's dead. So.
Just thou came, just thou shalt return.
That's right.
Nothing in the world, take nothing out.
Therefore I went about to cause my heart to despair of all the labor which I took under the sun. Everything was a problem. I don't know. I think each and every person on this earth can relate to this so clearly. I mean, it's all of us. It's all of us. Okay, we'll quit right there and pick up at 21 next week and get into chapter 3. Anybody have any questions, comments, or anything they'd like to say? I appreciate all your help this morning. Thank you very much.